today's training on health, safety, and environment. And today we'll be looking at confined space safety. Confined space safety. Now, what is confined space safety? Confined space is simply a space that is not just large enough for the body to enter inside and perform a work. It's simply a space that is not large enough to get the whole body inside to perform work. In other words, confined space has a limited space in such a way that when one wants to enter to carry out a task, he has to twist the body to a particular direction in order to gain entrance into such confined space. And also, confined space is a space that is not designed for continuous occupancy. I will have to take note of that. It's not designed for continuous occupancy. It's not meant for a kind of residence. It's just meant for you to go there, carry out the task, and then get out of the place. As a result of, not just because of the space, limited space, but also because of some hazardous or some presence of toxic gases that might be in such confined space, depending on the nature of the confined space and the activities being carried out there. Another aspect of, or rather another definition of confined space is a space that has limited or restricted entrance or exit. A confined space has limited entrance or exit. Now, what do we mean by limited entrance or exit? It simply means that it's not like a house where you can have door at the front edge, door at the backyard, door by the left, door by the right. No. The entrance and the exit is limited in the sense that it can have just one entrance, and in some cases, the entrance will also be the exit point. The entrance can also be the exit point in some cases. That is confined space. At the same time, when one is carrying out a task, whether it's maintenance work, whether it's installation, one has to take precaution while working in confined space. Let's look at some examples of confined space. What are some of the examples of confined space? One is tanks. I'm sure you know what tank is. You can use a water tank, for example. You can imagine how one can enter the water tank. Now imagine the size of the entrance, the entry point. If you have to enter it, you have to twist your body to a particular shape before you can be able to gain entrance. That's an example of confined space. The space is not much, it's limited in such a way that before you can enter it, in some cases, you might find it difficult to gain entrance due to the limited space or the little space for entrance and exit. Another example of confined space is the manhole or sewage. The manhole and sewage is also another example of confined space. The boilers, the grain storage bins, the storage tank, the pipeline, the manhole, they are all examples of confined space. I'm sure you know what pipeline is. Storage tank, the grain storage bins. That is the place where you use for storage of grains. All these are all examples of confined space. So we look at the characteristics of confined space. What are the things that makes that when we see, we can say this is a confined space? What are those characteristics? One, just like we said earlier, it has limited opening. Limited opening for entry or exit. Limited opening for entry or exit. Take for example, in the case of a tank, whereby the entry point is also the exit point. Of course, you know, tank doesn't have two entry points, just one. And that entry point is also the exit point. That's an example of a confined space. So talking about the characteristics of confined space, a confined space has limited opening for entry and exit. Another characteristics of confined space is that it has unfavorable natural ventilation. It has unfavorable natural ventilation. Take for example, the water tank that is closed for a long time, I mean the one that doesn't have water, is closed for a very long time, and then you open it. This is just a practical illustration. When you open the cover of the water tank and you put down your head, put your face into the tank, you perceive some unfavorable, the ventilation seems to be awkward, so to say. You seem to perceive a damp kind of smell. Why? There is no proper ventilation into that confined space, which is in this case tank. So that's an example of unfavorable natural ventilation. What it simply means is that there is no presence of air, natural air, into that particular tank or confined space, and as such it makes it unfavorable. The next characteristics of confined space is that it is not meant for continuous occupancy. A confined space is not meant for continuous occupancy. It's not where you go and say, oh, I've gotten a residency where I can just live. You know, it's not meant for continuous occupancy. You go in there, you carry out the purpose of what took you in there, and then you find your way out. And mind you, the more you stay in a confined space, the more prone you are to some toxic gases or to some unfavorable natural ventilation. In some cases, toxic chemicals, depending on the confined space. We look at the hazards one can encounter in a confined space. What are the hazards that one might likely face in a confined space? Number one is hazardous atmosphere. Hazardous atmosphere. In a case whereby there is no natural ventilation into the confined space. Of course, in the absence of natural ventilation, there will be presence of unfavorable natural ventilation, or what we call hazardous atmosphere. Another hazard one can face or encounter in confined space is engulfing materials. What do you mean by engulfing materials? Materials that can easily pick up fire, materials that can easily burn. You can find them in confined space. The next hazard one can encounter or come in contact with in confined space is entrapment. What do you mean by entrapment? Someone can be trapped. Possibility of being trapped in a confined space is what we call entrapment. The next hazard that one can face in confined space is the mechanical hazard. What is mechanical hazard? Those hazards that one can encounter while using the machines, or the hazards one can encounter with the machines in a confined space or equipment in a confined space. Some of those machines or those mechanical equipment have some sharp edges. Some have some unguided sharp edges. Some of them have some tooth open that are not guided, and as such there can be presence of cut which might injure a person in a confined space, and as such, it becomes a potential hazard in a confined space. The next hazard of confined space is the electricity. Electricity. One might say, what does electricity has to do with how is it a hazard in a confined space? Of course, when you enter a confined space and then you find the electrical connections, and then you see that they are all naked, the wires are naked, and then mistakenly one might get his or her, his hands or his foot or any part of his body in contact with such electrical cables, electrical wires, and as such, you know what will be the end point: electrocution, or something even more severe than that. The next point we'll look at today is a hazardous atmosphere in a confined space. A hazardous atmosphere in a confined space. It has one of the following, or even more of it. It has flammable dust. Remember we made mention of hazardous atmosphere earlier on. So what are the content of that hazardous atmosphere? That's what we're looking at now. One is flammable dust. The next one is oxygen content below 19.5%. And of course, you know, when oxygen is below 19.5%, the chances of someone going into coma is possible. In fact, as a matter of fact, it's high. The chances of one entering coma and possibly the probability of fatality in such case is very high when oxygen content is below 19.5%. And at the same time, when the oxygen content is above 23.5%, a similar thing also occurs. It also poses a death threat as a result of that high rate of oxygen. So it's very important for us to note at this point that when oxygen is below 19.5%, it's very deadly, it's dangerous. And at the same time, when it's above 23.5%, it's also more dangerous as well, if not deadly, so to say. The next hazardous atmosphere is air contaminants. Air contaminant concentrations that could cause death, incapacitation, or permanent health problems. In some cases, when the hazardous atmosphere doesn't result to death, it can cause permanent health problems that can linger for a long period of time, if not for a lifetime. I will look at the definition of entrapment, although I have defined that earlier on, but let's look at it again. Entrapment is simply a space of a confined space. When a space in a confined space is configured in such a way that it can trap a worker, it is designed in such a way that it can trap a worker, we'll call it entrapment. I will take it again. When the space of a confined space is configured in such a way that it can easily trap a person working there, that is what we call entrapment. For example, a confined space configured in such a way that it has slight sloping. It has slight sloping, whereby somebody can easily slip on it and then in the process be trapped towards the center or even at the edge. So other recognized hazards in confined space. We look at electrical lines, mechanical hazards, we've said that earlier on, hazard caused by the work, for example, hazard caused by welding, hazard caused by painting, and the rest of them. Of course, the hazard caused by welding, of course, flames is an example, and also hazard caused by painting. Of course, paint contains some chemicals which are, when inhaled in large quantity, can pose health problems. Another hazard in a confined space is temperatures, extreme temperature. Extreme temperature. When the temperature is high, it can also become a hazard in a confined space. Another hazard that is also very common is noise. Noise. When the noise in a confined space is high, it can pose a serious health challenge. An example is a noise-induced hearing. It can affect the hearing of such a person working in the confined space. Another hazard is sleep. Someone can easily sleep in a case whereby the floor is slippery or has some liquid, maybe water or oil, depending on the confined space, that can easily make a worker sleep and then fall, and in the process sustain injury. Now, how do you control hazards in a confined space? What are the ways of controlling hazard in a confined space? One of the ways is to prevent employee entry into such a confined space. Now, how do we prevent employee entry into the confined space? Of course, every confined space should have what we call a barrier or barricade that will prevent or hinder entrance into such a confined space. Now, this barricade or the barrier can only be removed when authorized, when a job or a work is authorized in that particular confined space. Then the barricade or the barrier can be removed for a worker to go there and then carry out the maintenance work or whatever work that needs to be carried out. After which, the place will also be barricaded back. So that's one of the ways to prevent employee entry in such a way that when there are no work going on there, the place should be out of entry, should be out of entry using barriers. Another way of controlling hazards in a confined space is to remove or reduce hazards in the confined space first before a person enters. We remove or reduce the hazards in the confined space before a person enters into the confined space to work. If hazards cannot be removed or controlled, you must use what we call written permit system. A written permit system to get entry into the confined space. Of course, we discussed earlier on in our last lecture, we discussed extensively on permits, if you can remember, work permit. We said it's an authorized document issued by, given to an individual when he or she is to carry out work in a hazardous environment or hazardous work site. I will give an illustration using the driver's license. I will say there is a similar document that one obtains as a work permit to carry out work in a hazardous work location. So how to control hazardous atmosphere? There are many ways. You can test air and ventilate. How do you control hazardous atmosphere? You can test the air in the confined space. If it's too hazardous that one cannot enter, that means there is need to reduce the volume of the contaminated air before one can gain entrance and then work in such location or facility. Exit space. Okay, blank off all infidel lines. Drain or pump out liquid contents, if any. in some cases whereby there are some presence of liquid toxic, in some cases where there are liquid toxic or liquid chemicals that can pose hazards, that can be a potential hazard to a worker, there is need to drain such liquids or pump such liquids out before one can enter and work in such facility. How do we eliminate physical hazards? We use what we call log out and tag out moving parts. Log out or tag out moving parts. Then de-energize electrical parts or wiring. De-energize simply means you restrict the flow of current in some electrical parts. You can do that by switching it off or unplugging some connection cables. Now look at how is entry into confined space classified. We have what we call written permit system, which is required for any high hazard entry. And then we have the alternate entry procedures. These alternate entry procedures is allowed for controlled atmospheric hazards only. We use alternate entry procedures when the hazards in a confined space can be controlled or can be reduced. But when the hazard is so high, we don't use alternate, we use what we call written permit system. And then the third one is the reclassified non-permit. Reclassified non-permit. Now, reclassified non-permit is allowed only if all hazards are eliminated. Now, note the difference. In written permit system, is used when there is high hazard. The hazard is so high. When the hazard is so high, you use the written permit system. That's the permit that will be required. But when the hazard can be controlled, we use what we call alternate entry procedure. And then when the hazards can be eliminated totally, we use what we call the reclassified non-permit. Take note of that. Now, there are some terms we have to discuss in confined space. Number one is entrant. Who is an entrant? An entrant is simply a person who enters into the permit space or the confined space. We'll call such a person an entrant. So an entrant is someone who enters into the confined space to work. Number two is attendant. Who is an attendant? An attendant is simply a person stationed outside the space or the work site who monitors the entrance. In other words, the attendant stays outside or at the entry point of the confined space and monitor the entrant, that is the person working inside the confined space. While entry supervisor is a person responsible for planning, authorizing, and terminating the entry. In other words, the entry supervisor is the one who approves the entrant to go in and work, and he is also the one who authorizes it and also the one who will terminate the work in a confined space if there is need for that without completing the work. If there is need to terminate the work without the work being completed, it is the duty of the entry supervisor. But take note of this. The attendant has a required knowledge. There are some required knowledge the attendant is meant to have. And how can he gain such knowledge? Is by attending the pre-entry briefing. Pre-entry briefing. It's just like a briefing that is usually conducted to inform the entrant, or rather the attendant, of the nature of the place he or she is going to carry out his or her duty, and also the potential hazards that he or she might also face. Remember, the entrant is not the only one exposed to hazards. The attendant too is also exposed to hazards. The difference is that they are not exposed in the same quantity. The entrant is more exposed to hazards than the attendant. Since the entrant is the one who gains entrance, who walks inside the confined space, while the attendant is stationed outside the confined space. And in such as such, both doesn't consume, they are not exposed to the same volume of hazards. The attendant will also know and understand the hazards in the confined space. It's also the duty of the attendant to know and track who is in the space at all times. He has to know the person and track the person at all times. The reason for that is to ensure that the person is still in a healthy condition, and to also ensure that the person is still alive. So he has to do the tracking. He has to always signal to make sure that the entrant is in safe condition from time to time. He has to know how and when to summon emergency help and does not enter the confined space to rescue the entrant. It is not the duty of the attendant to enter into the confined space to rescue the attendant. Even in the case of emergency, he has to call for help. There are people who call the rescuers. They are the ones trained to enter into the confined space to rescue the entrant in the case of emergency. It's not the duty of the attendant to enter into the confined space and rescue the entrant. Let's look at some safety rescue equipment. We have the hard hat, the goggles, the ventilation equipment. We have the radio, that is for communication. We have the ladder, and then we have the air supplying respirators. I will take it again. Some safety and rescue equipment that can be used in a confined space. So number one is hard hat. Number two is goggle. Number three is ventilation equipment. That is for air. Radio for communication. Then we have ladder for rescue, or in some cases when one is going to carry out work in a height, ladder will be needed. And then air supplying respirators, among so many others. Take note of this. A confined space rescue is very dangerous. Confined space rescue is dangerous, and as such, one is advised not to make attempt to go and rescue an entrant. Rather, you call for help, and then the supervisor will send the emergency rescue team, who are trained on rescue missions in a confined space. Now, how we call the non-entry rescue and the entry rescue? The entry rescue is a rescue whereby the rescuers have to enter into the confined space to rescue the person trapped or the worker trapped in there. While the non-entry rescue is a rescue usually done by retrieving a person out of a confined space without going into the confined space. But remember that an entrant must wear his or her full body harnesses with a retrieval line attached, just like a power holding staff who climbs the pole. You know, they have one retrieval device, or they use the belt. Let me create a picture of how the retrieval devices or retrieval line looks like, though they are not actually the same, but just like a common one that we all know of or are familiar with. That's how a retrieval device looks like. It's been attached either to the side of the entrance or around the waist of the entrance, and then with a long belt for retrieving the person in a case of emergency, whereby the rescuers don't have to enter into the confined space. Rather, they can draw or pull the person with that retrieval device. And remember, rescue mission is not for everyone. Is not for everyone. One has to be trained on rescue before he or she can engage on such activity. If not, the rescuer might also be trapped just like the entrant, and that can be disastrous. And remember, in conclusion, an unplanned rescue may probably be your last. An unplanned rescue can be disastrous. Before a rescue mission is being embarked on, there has to be adequate planning. Adequate planning has to be in place before a rescue mission can be carried out. With this, we have come to the end of confined space. We'll be proceeding to the next topic. But if you have a question, use the comment section and drop your question, and then you will get back to you with appropriate answers. Our next topic is first aid. We're looking at first aid. First aid is one of the major topics, also the vital topic in health, safety, and environment. We will talk about first aid. It's a popular word that we are all familiar with. We hear such a word basically on daily basis. We hear about first aid, day in, day out. And here we are to look at first aid in health, safety, and environment. Now, what is first aid? First aid is simply the first treatment given to an injured person before taking such a person to hospital. It's simply the first treatment given to an injured person before taking him or her to the hospital. First aid, once again, is the immediate and temporary treatment given to a person who suffer an accident or sudden illness before the medical help arrives. We are saying they are the same thing. It's an immediate treatment given to a person before medical team arrives. What are the aims of first aid? What are the aims or objectives of first aid? One is to preserve life. We can call it the 4 P's of first aid. 4 P's. 4 P's. 4 P's of first aid. That is 4 and P's of first aid. The first P stands for preserve life. The second P means to prevent further injury. And then the third P is to promote recovery. The last P, being the fourth P, is to protect yourself. Of course, as you are carrying out a first aid activity, you have to protect yourself. So these are the aims of first aid, which I can also choose to call the 4 P's of first aid. So a first aider must possess some qualities. Not everyone who claims to be a first aider is actually a first aider. There are some qualities one has to possess to become a good first aider. Remember, just like we have in leadership, there are qualities of a good leader, and when such qualities are not there, that leadership is questionable or can be deficient. So we look at the qualities of a first aider. What are the qualities of a first aider? One is that he or she must be kind. He must be a kind-hearted person for you to be a first aider. A good first aider, precisely. And second quality is that he or she must have knowledge. He or she must have knowledge on first aid. The next one is that he or she must be smart. He or she must be loyal. He or she must be honest. Must be firm. Must be able to work on the 3 P's that we just mentioned. Some will say 3 P's, some will say 4 P's. Remember, if you hear 3 P's, it means the last one is excluded. That is protect yourself. Basically, in safety, we know of the 3 P's. The 3 P's is more common. Not everyone uses the 4 P's. So in safety, the 3 P's is more used than the 4 P's. But just remember that when you hear of 3 P's, it means to protect yourself, to preserve life, to prevent further injury, and to promote recovery. That means they excluded the last one, that is protect yourself. But when you hear of 4 P's, it means you are including the last one. So the last quality of a first aider is that he or she must be sympathetic, must be a sympathy person for you to be a good first aider. And remember, a first aider is never a doctor and should never assume the role of a medical doctor. A first aider is not a doctor and should never assume the role of a medical doctor. And at the same time, a first aider's duty ends immediately the doctor or medical team arrives. As soon as the medical team arrives, the first aider hands over to the medical team or the doctor. So what are the procedures in first aid? We'll be looking at the procedures in first aid. One is to assess the situation. 2, you carry out what we call diagnosis. 3 is treatment. And then number 4 is disposal. What is disposal? Disposal simply means handing over to the medical team or to the doctor. So you dispose means you hand over to medical team. First aid procedures. I'll repeat it once again. What are the first aid procedures? 1, you assess the situation. When you see a victim, you ask, are you okay? You try to check the person. That is diagnosis. Try to find out what is wrong with this person. You check for air, check breath, check circulation of the blood. By so doing, you are kind of what we call diagnosis. And then after diagnosis, you carry out treatment. If there is obstruction to the airway, then you clear the airway and then check for breath. Of course, when the airway is obstructed, breath can be absent. And then after treatment, you dispose. That is, you hand over to medical team. What are some situations that a first aider might be confronted with? Let's look at some situations that, as a first aider, you can be confronted with. Such situations include the following. 1, severe bleeding. A first aider can always be confronted with 1, bleeding severely. Second confrontation might be unconsciousness, convulsion, epileptic, choking, when someone is choked, shock, electric shock, poisoning, fracture, multiple cases, as in the case of automobile accident or a motor accident. So all these are situations that a first aider can be confronted with. Remember, there is what we call the ABC of first aid. ABC of first aid. Just like your alphabets. A, B, C, D. Just ABC of first aid. A means airways. B stands for breath. C stands for circulation. I'll take it again. A for air. B stands for breath. C stands for circulation. So we are confronted with a situation as a first aider, these are the things that should be in your mind. ABCs. Check for airways, check for breath, and then check for circulation. And that will enable you know the further treatment you are going to embark on. Now we'll be looking at the first step of we'll look at the first step of CPR. The first step of carrying out CPR, that is, CPR means cardiopulmonary resuscitation. Cardiopulmonary resuscitation, that is CPR. Of course, I've made mention of airways. You clear airways, check if there's any obstruction to the nostrils. That is to clear airways. If there's any obstruction, you can remove like particles or stones or small pieces of materials that can obstruct the airways. You clear the airways. Then check for breath. Now, if there's no presence of breath, you try to give breath. And then the C stands for circulation. That's where the cardiopulmonary resuscitation comes in. The first step of carrying out CPR. So when you hear of CPR, it simply means cardiopulmonary resuscitation. CPR. The first step is to assess the victim and check for responsiveness. You assess the situation of the victim and check if the person is responding. How responsive is the person? You can do that by gently checking the person, shaking the person, and to observe, to make some observations, and then know the next step to take. So in a case of emergency, do not leave the victim unattended to. In a case of emergency, do not leave the victim unattended to. Let me make this announcement at this point. We'll work on a video of the practical section of this first aid and see how we can push it on for you to see some practical illustration. I might not be able to demonstrate here on this, but we'll make a video clip and then get across on the platform for a better understanding. So in a case of emergency, do not do the following. Do not do the following in a case of emergency. Do not leave the victim unattended to. Do not leave the victim unattended to. Do not make the victim to drink. Do not throw water on the victim's face. The reason being that we don't know what the person is, we don't know what the situation is. So don't throw water on the victim's face. That might be like adding salt or injury. Then put the victim into a sitting position. Do not put the victim into a sitting position. Rather, what do? Don't put the victim as a first aider on a sitting position. The way I'm sitting is wrong. Rather, you make the victim to lie down on a flat surface, not like a table, a bed, or possibly on the floor in the absence of any of those mentioned items. But not to sit down on a sitting position. And do not slap the person's face like most people do in our generation these days. They slap a person's face, not knowing the situation the person is passing through. In some cases, that slap might even be what will lead to the person's death. While the person is thinking he's trying to resuscitate the victim, not knowing that he contributed to the victim's death. So look at the ABC of CPR. Although I've made mention of this earlier on, but let's look at the ABC of CPR. When we talk about ABC of CPR, we're talking about the A, like I mentioned earlier, airways. B stands for breath, while C stands for circulation. So in administering CPR as a first aider, when you are administering CPR, there are three keywords, there are three letters that should be in your mind. That is A, B, C. A stands for breath, for airway. That you clear the airway by checking if there's any obstacle obstructing the airways. You clear the airways. B is for breath. Check for the person's breath. Then C is circulation. If there is no circulation, it means the blood is not circulating. And as such, you have to carry out what we call compression. We will see further, or you will see that on the practical section, which I mentioned earlier on. So we look at the importance of first aid. What are the importance of first aid? One is that first aid saves life of an individual. First aid saves life. It helps to avoid further injury. First aid helps to form a basis for subsequent treatment. It also helps in supplying details of accidents, injury, and the first aid treatment given to such a victim, and so on and so forth. Let's look at some tools or some kits we can see in a first aid. What are some of the tools we can find in a first aid box or first aid kit? Some of those things we can see in a first aid kit are bandage, scissors, that is for cutting. Of course, bandage is used for controlling bleeding. Then scissors is used for cutting. Then disposable gloves, that is the hand gloves. We have the syringe, we have the PPE, that is personal protective equipment. We also have the thermometer for checking temperature, and we also have the plaster. We look at some drugs we can see in a first aid box. Some of the drugs that can be found in a first aid box is the antibiotic, the calamine lotion, ibuprofen, alcohol pads, the poison treatment, syrup, aloe vera gel, and so many others. We have come to the end of first aid as a topic, and if you have any question, you can as well do well to use the comment section, and then a feedback will be given to you. We'll proceed to HSE communications. HSE communications as a topic. What is HSE? Health, safety, environment. Now we are looking at HSE communications. HSE communications are simply those safety communication tools, devices, signs that are used for communicating safety. It simply means passing or receiving safety information. HSE communication simply means passing or delivering safety and receiving safety information. To pass safety information and also to receive safety information. That is what HSE communication is all about. So it simply means passing, receiving safety information, values, ideas, cultures between people, or from one person to another, or from one person to group of persons, or from group of persons to group of persons. In case of what we are doing now, is an example of HSE communications as well. What I'm doing now is to communicate safety, and it can also be given as an example of HSE communication. We look at types of HSE communications. What are the various types of HSE communications? One is job-specific communication. Job-specific communication. The second one is informal communication. informal communication. And then number 3, emergency communication. And then number 4 is general safety communication. So basically, we have 4 types of HSC communications. I'll run through them again. Job-specific communications, informal communication, emergency communication, general safety communication. We'll take them one after the other. Job-specific communication is a communication that has to do with safety of a particular job, bringing you into awareness of the safety, how to stay safe in the course of you carrying out a particular job. While informal communication, just like when we have informal means of communication in English, is just similar. While emergency communication has to do with communication that has to do with emergency situations. In the case whereby you have, you can see something like signs for fire. In the case of fire outbreak, this is the exit route. This is exit route for fire. In the case of fire, this one is for where you can get fire extinguisher. All those are emergency communications. The emergency safety communications. Then we also have the general safety communications. General safety communication has to do with all kinds of communication. All safety communication is called general safety communication. The one we are doing now is an example of general safety communications. So what is the objective of safety communication? What is the objective of this HSC communication? 1 is to inform. Number 2 is to educate. To inform the people or to inform the worker. 2 is to educate the people or the worker. To entertain. To acquire knowledge. To enlighten. To persuade or promise, to motivate, to bring about change or innovation in the case whereby people are carrying out unsafe acts or unsafe condition in a place of work. By communicating safety, one of the objectives of communicating safety is to ensure that there is change in such behavior of unsafe act, or to ensure that there is change in unsafe condition in the workplace. And then lastly is to establish relationship between persons, to establish relationships between persons, And then lastly, to express feelings. We can use one of the objectives of safety communication is to express feelings. So we look at skills for safety communication. What are the skills required for one to have as a safety communicator or for safety communication? Just like in football, there are skills required for one to become a good football player. Of course, you know those skills. Likewise, in safety, there are some skills required for one to become a good safety communicator or to communicate safety effectively. What are those skills? Number 1 is simplicity of language. You have to use a simple language for you to be able to communicate safety effectively. That's why in most organizations, you see them using different languages just to communicate safety. You see them using English, they will use Hausa, they will use Yoruba, they will use Igbo, just to communicate, to make the language simple. And remember, for you to communicate effectively in safety, for you to be a good safety communicator, you have to use simple languages, not ambiguous ones. Number 2 skill is establishment of rapport. You have to establish a good rapport. Number three is the ability to listen. Number 3 is ability to listen. Number 4 is empathy. Use of appropriate medium. You have to use the appropriate channel for you to be able to communicate effectively. One of the skills required is for you to use the appropriate medium. The message must be clear. is another scale for safety communication. You have to state the message clearly, meaningfully, timely, and applicable. The message has to be clear, timely, meaningful, and applicable where it is used. You can't communicate a safety principle or safety communication where it's not applicable. Remember, just like we have effective communication, we also have ineffective communication. So, and as such, we'll be looking at those barriers to effective communications. What are those things that can hinder effective communication? Number one is language, or called language barrier. Number two is poor orientation and level of understanding. Poor educational background is number three. Financial constraint is number four. Distance between the originator and the receiver. That is the distance between the sender and the receiver, or the encoder and decoder. The absence of facilities, cultural background, age, religion, and physical disabilities. All these are barriers to effective communication regarding safety communication. So what are the methods of safety communication? What are the methods of communicating safety effectively? One is verbal. When we talk about verbal, we are talking about the oral or spoken. The one I'm doing now is what we call verbal. I'm communicating safety verbally. Then we have the written instructions, where you can see written on placards on on the wall, and so on. We have the warning and caution signs. We have the posters, the signals. We have the telecommunications. We have the postal systems. We have the notice boards in organizations where they post, where they place communicate safety using the notice board for everyone to see. And we also have the non-verbal communication. As much as we have the verbal, we also have the non-verbal communication. Now, non-verbal communication has to do with use of face, body, eye, hands to give signs. I choose to call it using body movement to communicate safety. That is all about HSE communication. And if you have any question on HSE communication, do well to use the comment section and we'll get back to you. Thank you. We'll proceed further to industrial security awareness. And that will be our last topic for today. That will be our last topic for today before we call it a day. Industrial security awareness is simply bringing into awareness of those security lapses or those security threats in organizations, in industries, in companies, and then ways of controlling them or tackling those security loopholes. That is what we'll look at in industrial security awareness. So what are the aims of this industrial security awareness? One is to protect both human and material assets. Both the human and material assets, to eradicate bad and negative influences among the workers. Of course, in every organization, there are bad influences, what is popularly called the bad eggs. They're always there in the organizations. We have the good ones and also the bad ones. So industrial security awareness ensures that those negative influencers ensures that those bad ones or those bad workers are handled effectively. Another aim of industrial security is to control internal and external crimes. Internal crime has to do with the crime inside the organization, while external, the one outside the organization. There are crime committed inside and there's some crime committed from outside. But industrial security awareness will handle both. Another aim of industrial security is to ensure operational efficiency in production. And lastly, to ensure that the company remains in business. Of course, if the company is out of business, definitely all the workers will be out of business or out of pay, as the case may be. Now, what is industrial security awareness? Industrial security is simply a proactive measure taken to protect and safeguard both human and material resources. There are measures, proactive measures, taken by organizations or by the industry to protect and safeguard the workers and also the assets in the organization. So let's look at the elements of security threats. What are those elements of security threats in organizations or in industries? One is insensitivities to area of vulnerabilities. When the industry is not sensitive to areas where they are vulnerable to attacks, to security attacks, when they are insensitive to loopholes, security loopholes, that's one of the elements of security threats. It becomes one of the elements of security threats. The next one is unsafe banking habits. Unsafe banking habits, keeping money in the workplace, in the organization. That's as an example of unsafe banking habits. Some organizations bank their money inside the organization, and that is not security wise. Then unsafe or unknown callers, unprotected doors and windows. Eye-to-eye contact with intruders, inaccessible emergency exits, turning your office to money transaction outfit, unguarded or uninvited visitors. In most organizations, they use what we call a tag. So when you come, one of the reasons for that is to ensure that the security in such organization is being monitored and controlled. They give you a tag, and as soon as you are going out, you also remit the tag back to them. They use that to control the security movement in the organization. And likewise, some unprotected doors and the windows can also be a threat to organization. When the windows and the doors are not properly guided or not properly or in the absence, when there are no security measures put in place, like the burglary not in place, can also make such a door or window vulnerable to security attack. So what are the elements of security consciousness? Let's look at the elements of security consciousness. What are those elements that can help us to be conscious, to be security conscious? One of them is people. Talking about the relatives, your neighbors, your friends, they can be of help regarding security consciousness. Those neighbors in your office, your relatives, your friends can also be a source of help or source of information towards security consciousness. Then procedures. Procedure simply means the ways or manner things are being done without prejudice. Procedure is the way things are being done. Just like I gave illustration in some industry organizations, when you are coming in, they have a procedure whereby that every visitor has to document his or her name and then address and contact. It's one of the procedures put in place to ensure that security measures are being checkmated in such organizations. And then next one is hardware. This one has to do with use of some equipment to beef up industrial security consciousness. You can see an example of that in some security doors and the rest of them. And scanners when they used to detect any metal and in some organizations. Then we have the security education and training. Security education and training, just like we are doing now, is an example. of security education and training. Let's look at some elements that can help us in this security consciousness control. One is use of animals like dogs, which are very sensitive to strange movements, and at the same time can raise alarm. Newsletters is one of them. Leaflets can also be used to increase our security education, especially within the organization and also outside the organization. And then next one is observable behavior. When you begin to observe some strange behaviors in workers that do seem strange, it has to be a hint that something is about to happen. We look at some what is asset. We look at asset protection in industry. So assets are important properties which industry owns and uses to realize or achieve their goals and objectives. Assets is simply important properties which industry owns and also uses to realize their goals and their objectives. What are these? How many types of what are the types of industrial assets? What are the types of industrial assets? I'm trying to speed up so that we can round up for today. Pardon me for that. Types of industrial assets. One is human. Number two is intangible, and then lastly is tangible. Talking about human assets, human workers, they also are assets to organization. Without the human force or the labor, there won't be any organization, because they are the one to carry out the task, and they are the one to do the logistics involved in the running of the organization. They will have the intangible asset and then the tangible asset. That's those one we can see and those one we cannot see. Those are the tangible and intangible assets. So look at some methods industry can employ. Some methods an organization can deploy in checkmating security in workplace. One of them is security risk assessment. Security risk assessment simply means carrying out an assessment on areas that are that poses a risk to the industry. Another one is security consciousness, using some things that can bring consciousness about security. Using security consciousness, like animals, we made mention of it earlier on, dogs and the rest. They recognize security threats, identify various harms, take appropriate security measures, conversant with environmental crime patterns. Conversant with the environmental crime patterns. One has to be, or the industry has to study the crime pattern in such area where the organization is existing and know how they operate, and then come out with a strategy on how to counter such crime operation. And then the last one is armed security personnel. That's the use of the armed personnel, like the police, the security personnel, to ensure the security of the industry. What we call access control in industry. Access control in industry. Access control in the industry simply means the way things are being done in organization or in the industry. The way one can gain access into the organization, the way you can move in and move out of the organization. That's what my access control in the industry. Controlling how people come into the industry and how they go out. One of them is what we mentioned earlier on, use of tags to ensure security, orderliness in the industry. We have different types of access control. One is physical control. Under physical control, we have what we call the personal ID card. Visitors gate pass, just like I mentioned earlier. That's why organizations or some industries use what we call ID cards. They produce ID cards for their staffs. Some might think it's just a normal thing. No, it's a security or what I call the access control in such an industry. Another one is use of a gate pass, what I call the tag, to control who goes in to the industry and who goes out of the industry. It helps them to checkmate people coming in and going out of the industry. We have the barriers, use of barriers, just like when you go to checkpoint. You know the pattern using checkpoint, where they can sort left, right, and then you'll be swingling in middle and be moving left and right. That's an example of turnstiles. Some organization has it inside the organization, whereby that will help them to control movement in such organization. Not just the barriers, there are also other ways, like the use of CCTV. The use of turnstiles, not just style. There are also use of turnstiles, whereby there are places where you have to go and turn inside the organization. There are places meant for parking, there are places meant for turning, and the rest of them. If you are going in, some of them have a setup in such a way that when you are going in, you have a route or a gate you follow, and when you are going out, you also have a different gate. They have their entrance and also their exit point differently. There are so many ways of physical control in industries, and it varies from industry to industry. Another one is also to use of CCTV, that is the closed circuit television, to monitor access control in the industry. That is number one. Number two is mechanical control. Remember we said number one is physical control, physical control. Number two is mechanical control. Mechanical control has to do with using the use of vehicles and equipment. The reason is for effective access control. To prevent theft, pilferage, sabotage, for communal disturbances and unwanted visitors. This mechanical control has to do with, let me give an illustration. We are going to some organization or some industries. Before you can enter, you see something like a pole used to barricade the entrance, or something like a pole or a rod used to barricade such places. And then when you might have been identified and then approved, they can now open it for you. That's an example of a mechanical control. And some use of vehicles as well. So how do we ensure effective access control? One is by use of security personnel. Two, use of visitors control reception room. Number three, use of physical barriers. Use of movement monitoring. You can do that using the CCTV. And then we'll have what we call theft in industry. We'll have different types of theft in industry. Different types of theft in industry. What is theft? Theft means taking of somebody else or company's property without due consent from such a person or the company is what we call theft. We have different types of theft. We have the fraud, which is mostly practiced by many. We also have the burglary, which is common in some places. We also have the pilferage. Pilferage has to do with stealing something of little value. We call it pilferage. For example, a staff working in an organization or in a company steals their stapler. We call that pilferage. Stealing something of a less value, stealing stapler. We can call it pilferage. Then we have organized crime. Such one has to do with a crime involving so many individuals collaborating together to carry out crime. And then we have what we call the theft triangle. The theft triangle, just like when we did the fire safety, we have what we call the fire triangle. The theft triangle means, simply illustrating that there are three things that need to be in place before theft can take place. And as a security personnel or a security expert, you have to have the knowledge of this theft triangle. One is the desire. Another thing again is the motive and then opportunity. When there is desire and then motive and then opportunity comes, of course there will be theft. Whenever theft occurs, these three things have been in the right proportion. There has been desire, there has been motive, and then there has been opportunity. Someone is desiring to have something that naturally he cannot afford, and then his motive might be just to maybe showcase himself or try to be in competition with someone else. And then when opportunity presents itself, and then there are no security measures put in place, the person sees an opportunity to carry out theft. So those three things has to be in place before theft can take place. But then why do some employees steal? Let's look at why employees steal in the organization. One is to augment income, to add to their income. Second one is in emergency situations, when some persons are under distress, they are under pressure to provide financially, or some are under emergency situations. Some of them can go into stealing. Some steal for excitement as well. There are people who steal for excitement. Some are hereditary, they is inborn. Some steal because of hunger. Some steal for hunger. Some are greediness. Some steal because they are greedy, and some steal because they are in their need. So what are some of the ways employees steal? One is by fake invoice of goods never delivered. Falsification of overtime. Falsify overtime. Gaining access to cash box in the organization. Impersonation, among so many others. Industrial fraud and fraud prevention. How can one prevent fraud in industry? But before then, we'll look at definition of fraud. What is fraud? Fraud is simply defined by the international standards of auditing as the misrepresentation of financial information by one or more individuals among management employees or other third partners. And they can do that using the, let's classify fraud. Classification of fraud. What are the classification of fraud? One is alteration of invoices. We mentioned that earlier, alteration of invoices, altering invoice. Double payment for invoice, payment of ghost workers, that is engaging ghost workers in payroll. Then falsification of overtime, false declaration, and so on and so forth. What are the causes of industrial fraud? Inadequate staffing. Staffing, lack of adequate financial and audit control. When there are no proper audit control, it can result to industrial fraud. Deficiency in the recruitment policy of the organization can also cause industrial fraud. Then poor salary and condition of service can as well cause that. Then nepotism is one of the causes of industrial fraud. And then inadequate policy regarding dismissal. When one is dismissed, in organization. We look at the motives. What motivates fraud? What are the things that motivates fraud? One, there are four things basically that motivates fraud. One is motive. Two, opportunity. Ability to rationalize and outside interest. Please take note of this. These are the four things that motivate fraud. When there is a motive, and then opportunity, and ability to rationalize, and then outside interest. So there are so many ways of security threats in organization. We have the bomb threat. The bomb threat of two types. We have the explosive devices and the incendiary devices. I'll take that again. Bomb as a threat in organization or industry. So bomb are of two types. The explosive devices and the incendiary devices. The explosive is the one that explodes, while the incendiary is the one that just catches fire. So how do we prevent this industrial security lapses? One is by perimeter fencing. Some preventive mechanism in industrial security is perimeter fencing, ensuring that the fence of the organization is on a certain height around the organization to ensure adequate security of the industry. Number two is internal security, use of internal security, and then personnel security as well. That is the use of security personnel, use of CCTV cameras, and so on and so forth, to ensure adequate security in the industry. Now we go to a very important aspect in security, industrial security, and that is one of the, we've talked about the bomb threat. Now we look at the kidnapping threat, which is one of the common things in this era. When there is kidnapping and hostage taking in industry, what do you do as a management personnel or as a safety personnel when there is kidnapping? What is security response? What will be the security response? Number one is to be sure that the kidnappers have taken their hostage. Be sure that the kidnappers truly took the hostages. You have to be sure that those hostages are with the kidnappers. It has to be confirmation. After which there should be another confirmation, which is to confirm that the victims are alive. After which we can now proceed to receiving phone calls to verify the names of the kidnapped victims, where they were kidnapped, and if possible to try to look at where they might likely be taken to. We will not have much time to discuss this in detail, but I believe we have done justice to this aspect of security threat regarding kidnapping. But most importantly, after you've done that, you can contact the security personnel, the agencies responsible for that. There are special agencies trained on that kidnapping threat in organizations. When you contact them, you can work hand in hand with them. They are experts on that. Then we'll go to the last part of the training for today, the last part of the topic, which is industrial espionage. What is industrial espionage? It's simply the practice whereby the company loses their valuable information to competitors and other unauthorized persons who may likely use such information against the industry or the organization. We'll call that industrial espionage. And what are those targeted information? Some of those are the formulas used in production. If, for example, you have a detergent company or industry, one of the targets will be the formula they use in producing such detergent. And if such formula is gotten, I can bet you the organization is gone, because the competition will be, they have the secret of that organization, and as such, it will be very easy to take the organization down. So what are the forms of this espionage attack? We have cashing on the carelessness and boastfulness of the employees of those targeted organizations. We have some use the method of planting agents in the organization of their target to achieve their purpose. There are so many ways, using temporary or casual workers, among so many others. So what are the precautions one should take? What are the precautionary measures? One is to ensure that the survey is through the survey of all possibilities. You carry out a survey of all possibilities of espionage attack. What are those areas that this industry is potentially exposed to industrial espionage? You carry out a check analysis on those aspects, and do not put doubtful or highly vulnerable staffs in sensitive positions. When you are putting people in sensitive positions, you have to be people who are very smart and who are not vulnerable to such attacks. You establish clear, defined procedures for handling sensitive or classified documents. You destroy all unwanted documents so that it cannot be or it cannot enter the wrong hands. And then change the keys and lockers of vulnerable information periodically. After a period of time, you change the keys to such sensitive documents in organizations. And then we also have sabotage in industries. Sabotage can be defined as the physical destruction of government or industrial properties or installations. And we have different types of sabotage. It's a popular one we have been hearing on a daily basis. We have different types of sabotage. We have the psychological sabotage, we have the physical sabotage, and then we have the mechanical sabotage. Psychological sabotage has to do with working on the tricking someone emotionally or psychologically rather to get some information that can be used to sabotage such organization. While physical sabotage has to do with one using materials to sabotage, physically sabotaging the organization, and then mechanically also has to do with destroying mechanical equipment of such organization. Well, what are those techniques? Those saboteur techniques. They have the professionals and what we call the amateurs. The professional saboteurs, they are trained to strike when you least expect them to do that. While the amateur are those who use just a simple method to carry out their sabotage. So look at the methods of sabotage. What are the methods of sabotage? One is explosive and explosions. Number two is they use explosives to carry out sabotage. The next one is fire, setting up a place on fire. And then mechanical, and then assassination. The reasons for the sabotage, there can be so many reasons depending on the saboteur. To affect or influence international politics. It can be politically, it can be on revenge, it can be on a response to what the person assumed to be an injustice done to him or her, among so many other reasons. How does one ensure safety, both at workplace and at home? We look at how one can ensure personal safety at home and also at workplace. One is to cultivate good sense of observation. You have to be very observant around your surroundings. You carry out what called routine checks. Carry out routine checks on a regular basis to ensure or to enhance security. You have to be aware of fraudsters and their tricks. Do not conduct Okay, these are safety at home. Then we'll look at the ones in office or at home. Okay, still at home. You make sure you cut down overgrown trees or shrubs. Those can be hideouts for saboteurs who might, or it can be a security threat point. You ensure that your house has simple exit doors and also the windows are properly guided. You make sure that the doors and the windows are closely locked tight whenever you are leaving the premises. Likewise, in the security of your car, ensure the cars are locked. Ensure you don't keep sensitive materials inside the car while you are going far. Especially when you are keeping it when it's visible to the eyes, you can attract what you never expected. Okay. At this point, we have come to the end of today's lecture on health, safety, and environment. And if you have any question on our lecture so far today, please do well, put it on the comment section, and then we'll get the feedback across. We'll get the feedback from us. Thank you, and see you in the next lecture.